Are you sitting down? You're seated. I thought maybe now you might just decide to do everything with the AirPods in. I mean, the clarity and the delivery in the leisure wear yesterday was nothing short of phenomenal.
I was just upset. I just picked the boys up from school. I thought, you know what, we got home. We're going to have to clear the head. Beautiful day in Adelaide. I just had to get a few things off my chest because it's just a bad deal. And Port Adelaide can spin it. And we might hear from Jason Cripps, who spoke on 3AW yesterday, and we'll certainly hear from Chris Davies when he joins us this morning. And they will spin it as though they just had to get into the draft, and they're likening it to the time when they traded away Chad Wingard, who was also a dual All-Australian, and that led to some pretty good players in the draft. But they just haven't got enough. And the thing that annoys me about the whole thing is how strong a game clubs speak. Like, as soon as Dan Houston said he was going to leave, the talk was, 2 first-round picks. Now, they weren't probably saying that publicly, but everyone that was listening, they were telling 2 first-round picks. We don't need to let him go. We don't have to. He's got 3 years left. He's a dual All-Australian. He's happy to come back. He said as much. So unless it's an extraordinary deal, we're not trading him. Well, it's not an extraordinary deal. In the end, you've given him away for a pick 13, which will end up being 16, and 29. I know there's some other stuff involved, but essentially the heart of the deal is 13, which will be 16, and 29, which probably will be 35, 36. So it's not when you traded Chad Wingard and you get Zach Butters and Connor Rosie in the top 10. You're nowhere near the top 10, and everyone's got good picks. Like every team has got good picks, and 13 or 16 when it pushes out isn't a great pick when you compare what Melbourne have got, what Richmond are going to get, what everyone's got. Everyone's got great picks this year, apart from Hawthorn. So. Yeah, I feel like it's a mini rebuild, but the problem with that is you've given away your first round pick for Jack Lukosius, which is another element to this deal which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now they will say judge us in 5 years' time. Okay, that's what every recruiter. That's why no one gets sacked in the recruiting departments. Like even Adelaide's recruiting department is still going strong after the errors that they have made. Like everyone gets 10 years because no one can judge a deal instantly. But this is what we're doing. We're instantly judging the deal. We don't have 5 years to wait. Ken Inkley certainly doesn't have 5 years to wait. And I feel like that deal sort of signed Ken Inkley's death certificate, really.
Couldn't get to sleep last night, says Jared, in anticipation of this Kane Cook. And you know what? You were inspired the whole way through by this famous scene.
Everybody be cool, this is a robbery!
So it was a robbery in your mind. If you missed it yesterday, this is Kane pounding the pavement over in Adelaide. Just a little snippet of his launching. So let's step through this because Costa's dropped us a text on the IMAR text line, 0426307511, and Costa's asking, can someone tell me what the difference is between the deal that went through compared to what was knocked back yesterday? Question. Now, there was Costa. No difference. Absolutely no difference. Now, it's the same deal as on Monday night when it was put up on blocks, when Collingwood and Gold Coast thought they had a deal, only for Port Adelaide to pull out of that agreement. That pick 50 that landed at Port Adelaide yesterday was there on Monday, but just wasn't reported or included. So, no change. So as yesterday resumed, Kane, and the Power desperately tried to get the best deal it could for Dan Houston, Collingwood was asked, I'm told, a good handful of times to keep sliding the pick back that they would be getting alongside him. Now, at the very beginning of dealings here, Collingwood was getting a pick in the 30s alongside Houston. Then they agreed to fall back to 50. Then they were asked repeatedly yesterday to take a pick in the 70s. Now, Collingwood continually said no, and it went nowhere. Now, you asked when we first jumped on air how these things happen between clubs. Well, initially yesterday, this was all being conducted via WebEx with the 3 clubs. And while Collingwood and Port Adelaide haggled over Houston and Port's agitation grew for a time, Gold Coast came in and hit them both with a deadline. The Suns had been bogged down for a time with the Power 2 on Rory Atkins and some late picks. We'll come back to that in a moment. But they'd settled it. And they said to Collingwood and Port that too many other clubs want this pick 13. So we're setting a deadline. If you want more for Houston, Port Adelaide, you need to work that out. Now, they ended up giving 2 deadlines because the first one came and went, but Gold Coast was satisfied that at least things had started to move between Collingwood and Port Adelaide. And this is where Paul Connors came in. He was crucial in pulling this together, given his management company look after Houston. And the veteran Gold Coast list boss, Craig Cameron, Port Adelaide list boss, Jason Cripps, they'd all met at Paul Connors' office to thrash out the specifics of this deal yesterday afternoon. And there was some big big meetings conducted there. But essentially, Gold Coast drove this. It was Cameron who drew the deal up in its entirety before the official email was sent by Ned Guy at the AFL for each club's approval, as is standard practice. Jason Cripps gave a one-word reply to the email, agreed. So Port Adelaide also needs some depth in defence. Gold Coast was able to convince them, Kane, to take Rory Atkins in the trade and to pay for the remaining year of his contract in full. Now, they did that because this is my question yesterday. How have you done that? How have Port accepted it? What's gone into it? My understanding is they agreed to give Port Adelaide a couple of picks in the third round as part of the trade. We'll give you these picks if you pick up the tab on Rory Atkins. Now, as a result of that, my understanding is now that the Suns have the cleanest salary cap they've had for maybe forever, but certainly for a very, very long time by virtue of the fact Lukosius has departed, heavily back-ended. Atkins, to a far lesser extent, is also departing. So, I don't know. I just look at Gold Coast, and in fact, they're going to be my right match, and I'll tell you why. But when Dan Rioli becomes a Sun today, it will put the full stop, in my opinion, on a 10 out of 10 trade period for Gold Coast. Now, their whole trade period's been the right match. They're going to give up too much for Dan Rioli, right? They're going to give 6 and 23, and Richmond will give the Suns, subject to it all being worked out today, 3 back-end picks to help with Leo Lombard point matching on draft night. Now, it's more than what Rioli is worth. We know that. They've got a different currency up there, and we need to know that too. They're like the investment banker who leaves a $100 tip for a club sandwich. The Suns' trade period's been outstanding. They got millions off the books with those players. They got their key targets in Rioli and Noble. They've now got 3 future first-rounders. They're going to get another top 10 talent in Leo Lombard in the door. And they've milked it beautifully. And they've got 2 players from big Victorian clubs wanting to come to them, which hasn't happened before. So they're happy to pay more. 3 first-rounders next year, which they'll trade out, I might add, again next year. This will just repeat because Zeke Eulin's coming through, Zeke the Freak, the academy kid, and some say could end up being number 1 in 12 months' time. So it's just going to keep going through the spin cycle for Gold Coast.
Yeah, so be careful what you wish for the AFL because it's going to become a point where Gold Coast are unbeatable. Like you cannot have this many good young players like guns for that many years in a row, and this availability with the cap that you're telling me, with actually players wanting to go and play there now with a good coach. They're just going to be dominant. And then you watch everyone in 3 to 4 years is going to be whinging about this. And we go, well, we tried to warn you. Like, we tried when the warning signs were there when Gold Coast were giving pick 6 for Dan Rioli. Like, it just doesn't mean anything to them like it does for other clubs. Like, Rioli gets 6 and 23. Houston gets 13 and 29. Like, work that out. So, Port Adelaide have got no hope. St Kilda have got no hope. Essendon have got no hope. No one's got any hope to compete with Gold Coast in 2 to 3 years' time when these players have all played 50, 60 games together and they're the best of the best, all playing in the one side together under a good coach. Like, so look out that they are going to come, and look, for them it has to come this year. Like they cannot have another year where they don't play finals. That just would be the most embarrassing situation for any team if they were failing to make finals next year with this group. But look out in 2 to 3, 4 years' time. Be careful what you wish for.
And just coming back to the Power and their part in this, I'm really looking forward to CD Chris Davies joining us. So the part that I don't quite understand is, I know they were dealing with Collingwood and they got the best deal they possibly could in the situation, but why couldn't they hold Dan Houston? Why couldn't they, or why wouldn't they? They needed to get into the draft, it would appear. They desperately wanted a foothold in the first round, and that's essentially what Jason Cripps was saying in terms of rebuilding on the run last night on 3RW. But, geez, if this was, I can't help but thinking, if this was Geelong or the Dogs, they're holding him at least for one more and to see what other avenues open up in 12 months' time to get a better deal. And to trade him to a direct rival who they'll probably run into in a final next year is also, I'm struggling to get my head around.
Yeah, I can't get my head around any elements of the deal. The only thing I would say is that I think that everyone is petrified of the Connor Sports Group, and if you're telling me that he's the conductor of this deal, and we'll hear from Jason Cripps in a moment with something that I thought was really bizarre with what he said, and we'll play that for you when we have it ready in a moment. That's the only that they didn't want to get the Connors Group offside for punishment down the line, and that's the only thing I can think of, because otherwise you just say to Dan Houston, like I said yesterday at this time, it's North Melbourne or you stay. Why couldn't they have done that? Because the deal for Lukosius had nothing to do with Dan Houston. They could have done that separately for a future first-round pick, which they've given. So that's completely separate. And everything else, you could have easily just dealt with Collingwood one-on-one with Joe Richards. Like, it's going to take a pick in the 40s, you would think, for Joe Richards, who, look, they're happy to get him, but we don't know if he can play. Like, there's a bit of talent there, but it's a speculative one, and it's certainly not compensation for Dan Houston. So why not just deal individually with Gold Coast on Lukosius, deal individually with Collingwood on Richards, and then go to Houston and say, it's North Melbourne because the deal's better, or you're staying. So that's a bit what I can't work out. Yeah, so he's thanking the Connors Sports Group. I feel like, so what are you thanking and being grateful to the Connors Sports Group for? That you've essentially got one of his players on your books for 3 years that was happy to stay. He wants to leave and break a 3-year contract, and you're hamstrung with where you can send him, and you've actually taken significant unders for a gun player that would be in your top 4 players. Dan Houston would be of a team that played in a prelim final last year, and you're thanking the Connors. So I don't know. I've had the theory for a while, as I think everyone's on board with it now, in terms of how you have to keep them on side. That's the only reason I can think that they've done this deal, is to keep the Connors Group, who was the orchestrator, as you told us, of this deal. Klein is Dan Houston, keeping them happy. Otherwise, you just wouldn't ever entertain a deal like that after playing in a prelim final last year, and a coach that's under pressure coming out of contract. And this deal makes you significantly worse aside next year.
But some calls as well. We've got a Dave in North Melbourne. G'day, Dave.
Morning. It's a cry for help. What I saw yesterday, an absolute cry for help. Our man doing the walk and talk. I've never seen it before done in Australian media.
A cry for help.
It's a cry for help. There's nothing surer, Sammy. I saw a broken man yesterday walking all alone through the streets of Adelaide.
Dave in North Melbourne. Now, I thought you were too expensive on your holiday rates to have access to you. When we try and get it, no, you can't afford me. I'm on holidays.
There's only one bloke that's on a new contract this year, and it ain't me.
Well, it's Friday. It just seemed fitting to get you on, Dave, in North Melbourne.
Well, I'm
Not
thinking
Friday.
about
Feels
an
like
emergency fireball Friday this week, given what I'd seen.
What do you think, Kenny? Give me you've sat back and you've observed this. I mean, have I overreacted here or not?
Well, I don't think so. These guys sit in these positions for 12 months, so this is not a decision made in haste. I don't understand it. I really don't, Cornsey. You know, your job is to build a list to give your coach the best opportunity to win a flag. And I just feel for Ken Hinkley. I mean, you talked about this list last year not being good enough, and the year prior to that not being good enough. And he'd done an exceptional job. And we've argued about that in the past. You just can't lose players the calibre of Dan Houston for just basically steak knives everywhere. Lukosius is a good player, but he's not Dan Houston, and he's on a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Geez, fascinating.
Sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it sad, eh? It's really sad.
Yeah, I can tell you're really upset about this. But I mean, you've been big on Gold Coast for a while now. Like surely Kingy next year is the now. They must move now.
Yeah, and this is all part of it, isn't it? I mean, we've talked about them a lot, and when you get coaches like Damien Harwick at the helm, the sell of what you're building, it's so easy and so obvious, and they attract players of the quality of Rioli and the like to just come and put the finishing touches on. They don't need a lot. We keep talking about this. The gaps in the competition are so small. The Giants could have easily won the flag this year. They, 7 goals up halfway through a third quarter, and the team that they were beating won the thing by 80 points. The gaps are so small that I think the Suns only need 1 or 2 players and maybe a couple of really strong seasons from their leaders, and they're there to win it. So I think you've just got to get this time of year right. If you go backwards in October, it is impossible to represent in September.
Hey, Kingy, our man Kane has been pretty outspoken about Collingwood's list strategy. I mean, we heard from the coach Craig McRae with Andy and Gazy a couple of weeks ago saying, and this is clearly was part of their strategy and their long-term plan, that they want players, not picks, all the golden oldies, and they are golden, but they're oldies, and they're going around again. So they're always going to be chips in. What difference do you think Dan Houston makes to the way they play?
Oh, huge. And I can see the way that Nick Dacos is used by Craig McRae. You never know where he's actually playing. Is he on ball? Is he halfback? Is he wing? Is he's at different spots at every stoppage. He's a disaster for the opposition coach's box to get a handle on. And I can see him doing the same thing with Dan Houston. Is he now an on-baller? Is he a half-forward? Is he running free? Do we have a clamp on him? Because he's the best ball user in the competition. What an asset to pick up for a future pick. I just think Collingwood have absolutely brained it with this selection. And I still, even though this guy's been an All-Australian calibre player at halfback, halfbacks don't win your flags. Midfielders win your flags. And I just think this guy will play midfield minutes next year.
Should Sydney have been more active, Kingy? Like when you look at what happened on grand final day, they've really done nothing throughout this trade period.
Yeah, surprising, isn't it? I thought they would have chased a tall forward. I mean, we've seen what the big 3 forward of the ball did in the final series, and apart from a casual affair against Port Adelaide, which was a bit of a myth, really. They were found wanting forward of the centre in the grand final. I thought they should have come for Tom Lynch. Just try and get Lynch out of Richmond for 18 months whilst you've still got Warner there, while you've still got Heaney playing this midfield role at the age that he is, and have one real crack at it with some quality forward of the ball. So I think that they've missed an opportunity. I'm not a believer that those guys forward of the ball are going to get the job done for them in 2025.
Dave from North Melbourne's with us, and great of him to call in on it's Fireball mixed with Deadline Day Trade Radio, which is melting my mind. But Kingy, when it comes time for you to embark on your summer training schedule, and you'll be getting around to all the clubs, you'll be out there at Arden Street, you'll perch yourself up, you'll perch yourself up on the hill behind the swimming pool there, and you'll have the binocs on, and you're watching Jack Darling, and you're watching Luke Parker, and you might even be watching Caleb Daniel running around. What would you be thinking about North Melbourne's trade period?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been looking back at the picks, the steak knife type picks over the last few years, and how many of them have actually made a difference at any of the clubs they've gone to? Any of them. Go back and have a look at last year's and the year before. There's 24 players move around, and they don't really do anything. They do nothing, apart from maybe the one in every 30. I'm not. I don't get caught up in it. I really don't. I don't think they'll have an impact at all.
Luke
I don't
Parker.
understand why. Well, Parker's there to educate and teach, and I just think third year in Alistair Clarkson. Why is this third year in? Why isn't this year one that we're doing this? What happened the previous 2 years?
Yeah. All right. Well, Dave, great to have you on, mate, and we appreciate you taking the time to call in now that you've got your feet up. What are you doing, by the way? What have you been spending your off-season?
I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm going to the Everest on the weekend in Sydney. That's going to be exciting.
There we go. You and the King.
Cornsey.
King meets King.
Yeah. Well, I got invited, and then they invited the other King, so I don't know who's sitting where. But we'll sort it out. But no, I'm getting to Sydney this week. Cornsey couldn't think of anything worse than going to the races.
Yeah, that would be up. That would be up there of a nightmare of mine. But can we have a walk and talk on your way in?
Yes.
I'll tell you what, I will. I'll post a walk and talk for you on the way. Especially if I see the big field. If I see Chuck, I'll give him a little shout out and ask him what he's thinking about the Port Adelaide trade.
With your Hoka leisure wear on too, please. That's the only way I'll accept it. Dave, out in North Melbourne, thanks for joining us, mate.
David.
Good on you, boys. Enjoy.